Hi everyone, this is the video about remainder theorem. So we're going to get started right on the top of the worksheet. It's going to talk to you about the remainder theorem. So let's say we have a division problem. If you look down at number 1 down below, you see a division problem. And it says divide this big polynomial 8x to the fourth minus 20x cubed minus 14x squared plus 8x plus 1 divided by x plus 1. Okay, could we, and this is actually a multiple choice question, could we do the full tabular division or remainder theorem, could we do the full tabular division or full synthetic division on this to find the full quotient? The answer is yes, we could, but another option that we can do is called the remainder theorem, which is a nice little shortcut to basically help us to determine our remainder quick and easily. So if you look at this multiple choice question, notice that all of these choices have the structure of quotient plus remainder divided by the divisor. So whatever is in the numerator of these things here, 1, 2, 3, and then nothing at the end is going to be the remainder. So we can use our remainder theorem to predict the remainder quickly and easily. So let's go over how to do it. The remainder theorem is used to determine the remainder for a polynomial division. We're going to start by doing exactly what we did for synthetic division. We're going to set the denominator, which is called the divisor, equal to 0, and we're going to solve for the value that is the 0, which is for x or whatever variable is being used. That's what we're going to do first. So let me show you. So take your denominator, x plus 1, which is the divisor, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. In this case, x is negative 1. This is the value that we're going to use to help us now. So step 2, after we get this value, instead of doing synthetic division, it says substitute this value into the polynomial that you're dividing into, which is called the dividend, or the numerator of your fraction if it's in a fraction form. So what do I mean by that? Well, you take negative 1, which is what you obtained here, and you're going to plug it in to this whole equation on the top, which is your dividend. So basically, if this were a function, which I would call f of x, right? And the function was 8x to the fourth minus 20x to the third minus 14x squared, blah, blah, blah. I would plug in the value that I just got here, negative 1. So I'd do 8 times negative 1 to the fourth minus 20, negative 1 to the third, minus 14, negative 1 squared, plus 80, negative 1 plus 1. Okay, and whatever I obtain when I plug that whole thing in is going to be the remainder. It's going to be a nice shortcut. So going back to the top here, it says the answer upon evaluating is the remainder. So that is really, really nice. If we get a 0 when we plug in that number, then there is no remainder or 0 remainder. And that means that that thing is a factor of the dividend. If the divisor is a factor, then the number that we plugged in is called a 0 of the polynomial. Okay, we're going to talk more about that as we do this question. So let's remember our steps. We're going to take what we're dividing by and set it equal to 0, and then plug in the number that we got into the numerator and see what we get. What we get is going to be the remainder. All right, so here you have what we were just doing. We took x plus 1, we set it equal to 0, we got negative 1, and now I could do this step here in a few different ways. So what I could do, step 1, is I could go to my home screen and I could plug in the full polynomial, which I think is kind of annoying. I could press 8 parentheses, negative 1 to the fourth, minus 20 parentheses, negative 1 to the third, etc. But the problem is with this, I think it's very easy for kids to forget parentheses or to maybe mess up. You see that I got 7 here, and that is probably going to be my remainder, but now I'm going to show you another nice way to do it. You can go to y equals, and you could type in your equation. So I'm going to give you a second here to type in your equation. Go to y equals, which is on the top left, and type in your numerator, which is called your dividend. Type in 8x to the fourth minus 20x to the third minus 14x squared plus 8x plus 1. And when you plug that whole thing in, go to the table. To get to the table, we press second graph, which is on the top. And then look at when x equals -1. Look at what's next to it, 7. So if I were to pull this, here we go, over here, I see I have -1, 7. And this means that that 7 is going to be the remainder. So when I plugged in -1 into that home screen, oh, that's a little ugly. There we go. I ended up getting 7. Okay? And that means the remainder is 7. So if you look at the choices, the only one with the 7 here is choice 2. That is remainder 7. That's it. So could you do the full tabular division and get the remainder? Yes. Could you do the full synthetic division and get the remainder? Yes. But this is a nice quick little shortcut, or it works if you choose to do tabular division or synthetic division and you want to check your remainder. You could quickly type this in y equals, and then you can look on the table every time. It's a great checker. So maybe let's write that down. Go to y equals on your calculator and type in the dividend, which is the numerator of your fraction, and then go to the table, which is second y equals table, and look at the x value in the table that you got, and look at the y that corresponds to it. And whatever corresponds to that value over here, that's going to be your remainder. Okay? That's that. Now let's look at number 2. Oh, so by the way, so if I had gotten remainder 0, then on the table it would have said 0 next to it. Instead of 7, it would have said 0 here. And then that would mean that remainder 0, and that would mean that that value is actually a 0 of the polynomial. Number 2. The graph of quadratic function is shown below. What is the remainder? Okay, so this one, they're not giving you the equation of f of x. They're just saying we're dividing this f of x, which is this graph here, it looks like. It's a quadratic or a parabola by x plus 2. And they're saying if we divide that, what's going to be the remainder? So you may be thinking like, what the heck? We don't have the equation here. Well, you're going to still do the same steps. You're going to take x plus 2, set it equal to 0, solve for x, and you're going to get x equals -2. Now, if we were to plug this in to the numerator in for f of x, we would want to find f of -2. In the past, maybe in Algebra 1, you learned about evaluating functions. Whatever is in the parentheses is the input, or the x value. And we want to find the output, or the y value. So if you look at this picture, you look on the x-axis, go across to x equals -2. And at x equals -2, go down with your pen or pencil till you hit the graph. And look at the corresponding y value here. The corresponding y value is -6. So this point is -2, -6. The x value is -2, and the y value is -6. So f of -2 is going to equal -6. This means that if I had done the full division, the remainder that I would have obtained would have been -6. And thus, this is not a factor, and there is a remainder. If I would have obtained 0, that would mean the remainder is 0, and it would be a factor, and that number would be a 0. Example would be if I was dividing by, look over here at where it crosses. It's actually not, this is not a helpful one, but let's say it had crossed at 3. Instead, pretend, let's just pretend, at x equals 3, and this were the point 3, 0. If I was dividing f of x by x minus 3, for example, the binomial x minus 3, then when I do x minus 3 equals 0 and solve for x, I'm going to get positive 3. When I plug in positive 3 into f of x, I'm going to look at 3, and let's pretend like this point was at 3, 0. This would mean that 3 is called a 0 of the polynomial f of x, and it would mean that the remainder is 0 when we divide, so thus x minus 3 is a factor.